Buried Arizona cities, D.C., 1899. Great ruins where once lived a forgotten race. Indications that earthquakes killed many of their inhabitants and that the others fled, never to return. Artificial rivers dug with an infinite amount of labor. Phoenix, Arizona, July 31st. A position is to be presented to Congress at its next session, asking that steps be taken to protect the buried cities of a wonderful prehistoric race in southern Arizona. It is hoped that Congress will create a government reservation or park, which will embrace several of the best preserved remains of large cities in the Gila Valley. The famous ruin of a prehistoric temple at Casa Grande has been successfully preserved by the creation of a government park of 4 acres. Without this protection, it would be probably have been obliterated by now. Many Americans familiar with the details of the unearthing of the temples at Nineveh and the explorations at Babylon and Thebes have little or no knowledge concerning the remains of prehistoric communities in the west of their own country. In the Gila and Salt River valleys of southern Arizona are relics of mysterious interest, which baffle investigation, and they are being hacked to pieces and carried away piecemeal because Americans know little about them and the government does not care. They have been more rapidly effaced during the last dozen years than in the previous century. The ranchman and the farmer are clearing the land of prehistoric walls and excavations to sow wheat and alfalfa crops. Modern irrigation systems are demolishing aboriginal masterpieces of masonry, and curio hunters are hacking to pieces mural works and digging into ancient tombs, merely to get something uncommon to keep or sell. Every curio store in the Southwest has for sale great heaps of relics from Arizona. On a broad sloping plain, beginning at the confluence of the Gila and Salt Rivers, 42 miles from Phoenix, are the greatest ruins of the prehistoric towns. Some men of science say these towns were built in the Stone Age. Others say they existed 7,000 years ago. There are outlines of 2 towns among the sandy wastes that must have had populations of 40,000 to 50,000 each, while there are a half dozen other ruined towns of 20,000 population. Their builders had a high degree of engineering skill. Huge trees were transported to them from forests 60 miles away. Great masses of stone were brought from far-off quarries. For about 90 square miles, the Gila Valley is an aggregation of ruins. Irrigation canals, the oldest known in the civilized world, are found throughout the region. These waterways were built with exactness and skill. The largest has been sadly torn to pieces in the last few years by the ranchmen, but it still shows the wonders of its construction. It has an average width of 7 feet. It is 60 miles long, and it terminates in a reservoir a mile long and half-mile wide. Think of the enormous labor of constructing such a canal and reservoir with stone implements and of carrying the excavated earth away in wicker baskets. But that is only one of 17 distinct prehistoric irrigation systems in the Gila Valley. The size of these canals gives some idea of the scale of which these people conducted their agricultural operations. They constructed an artificial river to supply the water which their crops required. They grew great quantities of corn. They also raised beans as well as 2 or 3 varieties of squash. Professor McGee of the Smithsonian Institution thinks it probable that they kept the guanaco in domestication, and evidences are found which indicate pretty certainly that they had turkeys. One may walk for miles in this region and find every foot of the sandy surface more or less mixed with the pieces of broken pottery. The paint is still on them and is not in the least faded, though they have lain exposed for centuries. In the neighborhood of Tempe, an overflow from the Gila at some distant period washed against the ruins until they crumbled and were spread out level with the country. Back 10 miles from the Gila River, the ground is higher and was once the site of a city. Portions of the buried city wall by which it was protected are still standing, more than 20 feet in thickness. Inside are the mound-like ruins of the houses, which being less durable have crumbled. The buildings must have been very large, for in some instances the mounds are 300 feet in length by 200 in width and 20 in height. Much of the country is very little higher than the present bed of the Gila, and at one time a branch of that stream must have flowed into the basin which formed a natural reservoir. There was a rise of about 10 feet at one point between the basin and the river, and the sandstone formation shows unmistakable signs having been cut by artificial means, perhaps with the idea of assisting the entrance of the water by enlarging the passage. 5 canals lead out of the basin, all on the south and the west, which confirm the belief that it was once a reservoir formed chiefly by nature and used to store water against the periods of drought. The expedition that worked during the winters of 1896, 97, and 98 under the patronage of Mr. Batum in the neighborhood of Mesa, a little town in the eastern part of Maricopa County, revealed vast possibilities for scientific investigation in these buried communities. The site of the investigation was what is known as the Mesa Grande, or Big Upland. Between the two principal rivers in southern Arizona, the Gila and the Salt, whose combined current finds vent in the Rio Colorado at Yuma, one of the 7 buried cities there known as Las Aquitas. It covers an area nearly 2.5 miles square and probably once had a population of 25,000 people. Exploration shows that the great artificial canals, which were its arteries of commerce and agriculture, were elaborately terraced. Millions of cobblestones were used to retain the canal banks. An army of thousands of men and women must have spent months, perhaps years, in carrying loads of stones in wicker baskets on their back from the distant places to the banks. The largest canal leading to Las Aquitas consisted of a central ditch, 5 feet in width at the bottom and broadening above to 30 feet. It was 14 feet deep. It was 24 miles long. It terminated in a closed reservoir, a mile in length by half a mile width. The construction of such a work nowadays would by no mean engineering enterprise, but the vastness of the undertaking by a little city where only stone implements for digging and wicker baskets for transportation were known is extraordinary. The Batum explorations also revealed the interesting manner in which the mysterious race protected its canals against seepage of water therefrom. For water obtained at such physical expanse is very precious in any community, ancient or modern. To render the clay beds of the canals impervious was first puddled, and then by means of burning brush and wood, it was burned to a terracotta consistency. The Batum expedition proved the fact that the prehistoric people used their canals for navigation. The enormous cedar timbers that are yet found in the wonderful towns came from mountains 5,000 feet high and about 70 miles distance. There was no way to get them to this place for their use but by floating them down the rivers and through the canals. The course of the smaller canals may now be traced centuries after they have been filled with sand and vegetation, by means of small black pebbles placed along the inner banks of the inhabitants, in the belief held by the locals. The exploration of Professor Adolphus E. Bandelier and Mr. Batum show clearly that these prehistoric towns extended along the sides of the main canal for a great distance, in proportion to their width, and were situated on the outer edge of the cultivated tract, which included all the intervening land to the river. The towns all consisted of enormous central citadel or temple buildings, within clusters of dwellings in walled enclosures, which in turn were surrounded by the huts of the laborers. Stone and sun-dried bricks were used as building materials, and the main earthen walls were formed within a framework of timber and walled cane. Thus, their architecture was derived, like their pottery, from original basket types. The best preserved walls show that the houses were in a large communal block, 300 or 400 feet long by 200 feet wide, and possibly larger, built 3 or 4 stories high of adobe bricks without admixture of straw. They were situated near the canal or its branches, were sometimes provided with a special reservoir, and in all cases had one or more pits or ovens for cooking purposes. The walls were probably protected from climate influences by cement of some kind. The citadel structures are thought, from the thickness of the walls and the amount of debris, to have been 6 or 7 stories high, and to have been used in times of war as a place of refuge. In each city was also another large public edifice, oval in form, 40 or 50 feet in diameter, and conjectured to have been a temple of the sun. Representations are found in the rock inscriptions and in terracotta images of an animal that was undoubtedly used as a beast of burden. This beast resembled the llama of South America. Spanish writers at the time of the conquest by Cortez and Pizarro speak of the existence of woolen cloth among Pueblo Indians. And as nothing has been disclosed indicating contact with the whites, it is presumed that these people had domesticated the llama. If this is so, it establishes a connection between these people in Arizona and the Peruvians. It also proves that either these prehistoric Arizona people were of great antiquity, or else there existed an animal of the same species as the llama in North America much later than is supposed by natural historians. The 27 skeletons that the Batum expedition secured and the hundreds of others that curio dealers and museum men have dug up show that the people were small in stature, and their skulls were broader across than lengthwise, like those of the Zunis, the Aztecs, and the Peruvians. Some of the skulls have a little extra bone in the back part of the head, a peculiarity among the Incans, and known as the Inca bone. This fact indicates a close relationship between the mysterious race in Arizona and the civilization of South America. Professor Bandelier, who has spent a dozen winters studying the prehistoric remains of Arizona, believes that religion was the main purpose of life among these people. Each action appears to have been vested with a significance of its own, even the location of public structures being determined by certain mythological indications. These people worshiped the sun and had lodge rooms in the temple. Sacrificial stones have been dug up in several spots, but the nature of the sacrifice has not yet been determined. The burial customs shed some light on the social and religious ideas prevalent at the time. To secure the liberation of the soul after death, the body was burned and the ashes enclosed in an urn placed at the foot of the pyramidal mound. This was not considered necessary in the case of the priest and members of the esoteric societies, who had a simple burial in graves prepared below the floor of the house. In these graves, the body, thickly wrapped in cotton cloths so as to exclude moisture, was placed and covered with soft adobe, while on drying formed a substantial vault. Adobe sarcophagi, supposed, from their extra decorations, to contain the remains of persons of exceptional note, have been found in the upper stories of the citadels. It is inferred from the fact that bodies are occasionally found together that man and wife were interned side by side. Like all nature worshippers, these people endowed each object with its spirit counterpart and either buried or burned the individual's belongings besides the body, that they might have accompanied him on his spiritual journey. Likewise, the burial urn was killed by cracking or perforating its side in order that the soul might escape. The ancient city of Los Muertos had a population of more than 65,000, perhaps before the days of the pharaohs and the Roman kings. The city is laid out north and south. At least in the majority of the instances, the streets run to these cardinal points. The walls seem to vary a little from this rule. In fact, they are crooked in places, as if they might have been constructed for the support of bastions or towers. This city and the one containing the old fort farther down the Gila River are the only ones in which the writer ever found any evidences of preparation for war. It seems as if the race who lived in this Gila County was either so numerous that it feared no attack or had no enemies which to contend. South of Phoenix on this mesa are the ruined corrals or stock pens in which the animals of the inhabitants were kept. Many finds proved the purpose for which they were used. What the animals were is not so easily determined. On the slats found in the ruins south of the Salt River are splendid figures of llamas. In the ruins that have best withstood the exposure of the ages, many interesting specimens of the ceramic art have been found. Of all shapes and sizes, runs containing the ashes of the dead, and jars partly filled with parched corn, beans are found in a remarkable state of preservation. It seems as if the entire city had been swept by a flood, and the earthen houses melted down or shaken by an earthquake and toppled into 1,000 fragments, giving the inhabitants barely time to escape. Few of the skeletons that the amateur explorers have taken out show signs of mutilation or have broken bones. The people appear to have died of suffocation or some natural cause that left no mark upon the frame. In several spots where bones have been found, deeper digging has brought to light large quantities of bone dust, as fine and light as gunpowder. In one spot near Tempe, several tons of bone dust have been found recently lying in what appears to have been a trench, some 70 feet long and 2 feet deep, 9 feet below the surface of the sun-baked earth. The ledges of the deposit of bone dust were broken and uneven, so that it could not have marked a place of burial. The ruins, which may still be traced, of the great communal or holy structure in the center of each of these larger prehistoric cities, are furnishing most abundant material for research by the exploring scientists. At Los Muertos, this building is believed, from the outline of the ruins, to have covered an acre. The Smithsonian ethnologists have reason to believe that the site of this temple is rich in burial relics, which will reveal many facts concerning the mysterious race which lived and died there. The famous ruin, a pre-Columbian structure in Casa Grande, also in the Gila Valley, gives one an idea of what these communal structures may have been. The Casa Grande ruin was very much as it is now when Coronado and its conquistadors marched into Arizona from Mexico in 1540. It is composed of huge blocks of earth, averaging 4 feet long and 2 feet thick. The blocks were no doubt made on the spot and so well constructed that they have resisted perhaps 3,000 years of wear and tear from the elements, earthquakes, and hackings by curio seekers.